pieces settle down in abject beauty erected for a century of a century, speaking, advocating, protesting as the arts are meant to be.
Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folari. Hope you had a great weekend. Okay, today let's look at the ongoing United Nations conference on climate change. Actually, in Nigeria, that particular conference, abbreviated to COP28, has been in the news for, for the kind of, not for any of the reasons why they are gathered together, but all of that seems to have been sorted now, in that there's this whole matter about a ginormous number of representatives for Nigeria. But the latest that we've heard is that it was mistaken to view those as a Nigerian-sponsored attendance, that not everybody that is registered. So many people, will register, whether government, whether, NGO, whether so many people will register, and they will all register under the country of their origin. Indeed, some will register but will not even be present physically, we have since learned, because there was a scare that what was Nigeria doing with all of those numbers? But that's just to the side. The much more important business is that it's a conference to address the question of global warming. And we have regular experts, Mr. Desmond Majekodunmi, environmentalist and chair of the Lekki State Urban Forest and Animal Shelter Initiative. A fine morning to you, Mr. Majekodunmi.
Good morning to you too. But why were they complaining that we sent? I mean, is Nigeria not the giant of Africa? We're supposed to send a giant delegation.
Yeah, but people started to compare that. Look at China. Look at the GDP of China. Look at Nigeria. Look at its GDP. And how was Nigeria matching the same number of, delegates, so to speak, as China? That, come on, weren't we, we were being wasteful here until that explanation came through that government was not necessarily sponsoring everybody that was there, but that whoever registers, your country of origin, be it an NGO, be it government, of course, will have its own people. So that, I think that had to come out of the presidency this morning, because the hue and cry was really much.
So they wanted to do no,
exactly.
I know some people, when they sponsored the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, they certainly didn't go there for a party. They went there to look after the planet, to see what they can do to make nature healthy.
Indeed, and in fact, so much so that the spokesman from the presidency had to use that very word, jamboree, that they were not, Nigerians were not there for a jamboree, as people had sort of conjectured. Indeed, opposition politicians were quite alarmed and had expressed the alarm. I don't know if they'll be feeling better now that the explanation has come through, that the fact that we happen to numerically match the same number of delegates as China does not mean that we were flexing in that kind of way. And government has given the indication that for all practical purposes, no, we probably don't have that number of people in there. But as I said, coming on to the main business, it's a conference to see how to address global warming and climate change. Now, one of the interesting aspects of that whole conference, which is being headed by, a Saudi businessman, engineer, and politician, Sultan Al Jaber, it's been seen as controversial in the sense that he is the he is the chair of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Corporation. And Sultan Jaber has been seen as, wait a minute, you are chair of the oil corporation. All of this problem is coming from fossil fuels. How come you make that kind of a person the head of this conference? So there's been that ongoing debate. Many have called for his removal, but UK, for instance, is not among those people who have said that he's an excellent chap. And indeed, he did, on the very first day of the conference, gain widespread applause when he pointed out that, look, the very problem of global warming and climate change seems to stem from fossil fuels. He thought it was fitting to have someone from inside the problem so that it could be changed from inside as opposed to people from outside, professing changes. I don't know if you had an opinion on that whole scene generally before we look at what would Nigeria be seeking to gain from attendance and what would be Nigeria's input?
That's a very deep insight, and it's a very, very interesting situation, because as they say, it takes a thief to catch a thief. And the reality is that this man too will be affected. He has children, maybe even already has grandchildren. And the reality is that the future of our children is at risk, at serious, serious risk. Not just because, okay, the atmosphere is getting bad and there will be maybe a lot more people getting sick and whatever. No. Because we have now pushed it very close to a tipping point. That is the amount of greenhouse gases that are there, and most of those greenhouse gases come from burning the fossil fuel. We're pushing it very close to a tipping point, whereby if we continue with this rate of emission, we will not be able to stop the process of the global warming, and it will turn catastrophic in a few decades. Indeed. That is the most worrying part of it. And it affects all of us, affects all of our children and our grandchildren. So it is probably a good thing to have somebody who is, right on top of the industry that is the major cause of this problem.
Yes.
To be there. Yeah, I endorse it, because he must love his own children. Is he going to put is he going to put profits ahead of the livelihood of his own children? I doubt it.
Even though why people were worried about him was that, look, Abu Dhabi, and the, Arabia generally, they have this situation where oil is a key, source of their income. And so how sincere would they be? But as I said, the Sultan's view is that fossil fuels, I'm quoting directly now, are at the heart of the climate crisis. So it makes sense to persuade that industry to change from the inside. I suppose the operative word there is persuade. Because, so I can see that they're going to have to be managing, it's like a delicate scale and balance. But he's in there. The man he's a politician, he's a lawyer, he's an engineer, and he's committed. And as I said, he did get wide applause on the first day of the conference when he secured that agreement, just as you have agreed now that, guys, some people calling for my removal. It makes a lot of sense to have an insider heading this whole thing and persuading those insiders to see the sense, the truth, the veracity of what you're saying, and work, as it were, on behalf of the world from inside the fossil fuel industry. But having said that, I don't know, fossil fuel is not letting up. Oh yes, we have the Enoch Musks of this world that by now have, in America today, if you can afford it, and that's one of the questions, it's prohibitively high at the moment. If you can afford it, your whole house, that is simply not putting these corrugated iron sheets on your house, simply putting solar panels on your house instead, special solar panels, then you can actually be running your house, indeed your factory, from the sun, so to speak. Cars these days, everybody is researching on, battery-powered cars. Electric, in short. When we say battery, we're really talking about electric. So I don't know. Do you think Nigeria is in a place to be able to make any difference, considering our, trajectory of development and where we are at the moment?
Yes. The irony is that, not just Nigeria, but Africa generally is a pretty small contributor to the problem, although we're rapidly growing. We're rapidly growing to become a more major contributor to the problem. And the fact that the problem is so urgent and needs to be addressed very, very urgently, that we in Nigeria we have no choice, just like even the Saudis and so on, to become more part of the solution than to continue to be part of the problem. Because of the urgency of the problem and the severity of the problem. That's what we need to get through our consciousness. This thing is dealing with the Earth's very life support systems. This miraculous planet, this planet out of millions, that is the only one that can support life because of the various systems it has, including the atmospheric gas systems, which ensure that we retain just a certain amount of heat and do not go over hot. If your body, the Earth is like a giant body. If your body goes just a few degrees above its normal temperature, you're sick. And we cannot afford to make our planet, which is our life support system, sick. So yes, it is a challenge to all of us, but we just have to grit our teeth and do it. But the good thing is, Nigeria is a blessed country. Yeah? Not only do we have all those fossil fuel resources, we have so many other resources. You were referring to earlier about the sunlight. We have more sunlight, more sun hours
being in the
most
tropics.
other countries. Oh, it's all there. And now the technology is not just taking the light itself to produce electricity. They're also taking sun heat with the parabolic mirror reflectors and so on to produce electricity. Is it heat in the northern areas? We have so much of that. We have wave energy, constant wave energy along our coastline. Even our streams and rivers, they can produce electricity with their motion. We have wind, so much wind. So, we have so much potential just for producing the electricity without having to burn this toxic substance.
Indeed.
And the reality is toxic. My brother, if I bring the generator into that room, will you allow me to spark the generator?
the generators that we depend on here, and the emissions from all those generators, that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, but if I bring it into your studio, you won't allow me to turn it on. You won't stay in the room. It's a poison. So we got to face that reality. It's a poisonous substance, and we got to stop using it.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Majekodunmi, that's a very delicate point you've arrived at there, because again, I go back to our trajectory at the moment where we are at. The public power supply it's a work in progress. In the meantime, people, just to use the whole matter of the generation of electricity, people have to generate their own, and so generators come into it, not just industry and then, on the private sector. And it's the emissions. First of all, it's the fuel that you're going to need, and then having got the fuel in, that won't cause its own problems in getting the fuel. Now that you're actually running it, it's simplistic to say that it is now the emission into the atmosphere is not doing the atmosphere any good. So it's like a double whammy. But it seems that, and that's why it'll be interesting to hear what our delegates, what their contribution is going to be at that particular conference. It'll be quite interesting to because you've spoken about alternatives, but it's about the emissions, it's about, and you also pointed out earlier that it's our own contribution to this problem is microscopic compared to, the West. They are the people flying all the planes around. We don't mind flying. But I don't know whether they're going to come up with electric planes and all of that kind of a thing, where we generally, I suppose the objective will be a zero emission of these toxic fuels that are coming, the toxic emissions that are coming from fossil fuels that we're using.
Yeah, it has to be. We just have to go. In the past they could use ignorance. Now we're no longer ignorant. Everybody knows that is too toxic, and we can't continue. But we have again, we're so blessed in Nigeria, because the transition through that a lot of people are looking at is the natural gas, and we have abundance of natural gas. It has to be deployed judiciously, because if it leaks, it gives off far more greenhouse effects than the carbon dioxide that comes from burning the fossil fuel. So yeah, that's a transition for us, and I see there's a lot of talk about that. Mr. President has been saying himself that he wants to ensure that we go into public sector transport that is driven by gas, which is it's a healthy and a very positive, good development, and it should be a lot cheaper to supply as well. So as a transition fuel, we could, persuade ourselves, well, maybe we could do that. But in terms of, burning the petrol and the diesel, there has to be a strict limitation on the time